Welcome to Data Center Dialogues, the podcast that empowers your data center knowledge. I'm Francesca Van Thielen. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing issues shaping Europe's digital future, data sovereignty. European regulations like NIS2 and DORA are redrawing the boundaries of accountability and control. At the same time, global players continue to shape where our data resides and who ultimately has access to it. Sovereignty is no longer just a legal concept, it is a strategic one. To unpack what this means for European organizations, I'm joined by two experts who help companies navigate the complex intersection of compliance, technology, and resilience. Lieven Heuninck is Managing Partner and CEO of Apogado. He has years of experience in IT governance and risk management, guiding companies through compliance frameworks and helping them build resilience from the inside out. Joining us as well is Lowie Schaubroeck, Managing Director of Lebon IT. They support organizations with digital transformation, helping them turn data protection and regulation into strategic opportunities. Very warm welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with the basics and facts. When we talk about data sovereignty, what does that actually mean for both of you, Lieven?
Data sovereignty is which jurisdiction does apply to your data. So the data is stored in a country, and of course in each country there are legal laws, and it's the data sovereignty in fact determines which law do apply to your data.
Mm-hmm. That's a very clear definition. Thank you. So what about you, Lowie?
I can agree with what Lieven says. I think it's very important that companies know where their data is. And data sovereignty is also about the laws and the things behind it. But I think every company should make himself aware on where their data is stored and under which laws it's applied to.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk about the fact that Europe is really raising the bar with new regulation. Well, it's not that new, but quite new. NIS2 and DORA. For many CIOs, it offers a big challenge, but also opportunities. So what are those opportunities and challenges, according to you?
Let me first explain what those regulations are all about. So, those regulations, they start to exist at the European level, and they descend towards the member states. For NIS2, that's a regulation. It's a directive from the EU, and it needs to be translated into local laws for the member states. And NIS2 handles the network information security. So everything what has to do with cybersecurity, how can you make yourself cyber resilient, and so on. So, and each country adapts and makes those laws so that the whole ecosystem is more cyber secure everywhere.
That's what NIS2 is about. What about DORA?
DORA is a regulation. So a regulation comes immediately into force once it's voted. DORA is they serve the same purpose. So they're there for the digital resilience. DORA is focused on the financial institutions and is focused more on the ICT risks and ICT, but also cybersecurity aspects. Towards NIS2 is only about cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. So for a CIO, for example, what are the challenges and the opportunities regarding these new regulations, NIS2 and DORA?
So first of all, regulations, they are in the law. So it's a pity, but you have to obey to those laws. So nobody likes to hear those stuff which is posed upon us. So it's the law. That's the one thing. That's the one side of the story. The other side is it can also help you. So it can also help you. For instance, the Data Act can help each party to negotiate, to enforce as cloud complier, to give the data. So that's so regulations can also help you. And thirdly, the regulations can also bring a competitive advantage. So once you have your data sovereignty, you have all your NIS2 regulations, you're compliant with NIS2 or DORA, that gives you also a competitive advantage towards your competitors.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add, I see that you talked about European legislation or regulation pushed towards the member states. If I see it from a perspective as an IT partner, which helps organizations on infrastructure and networking. I think like the CCB, they did already a big effort in translating that regulation in something that can help a CIO or a CISO in the things he has to do with the 4 different levels and the Siphon framework they've been building out. So they translated something which is quite abstract into concrete controls that can help a CIO in order how to build a cyber resilient infrastructure and be or grow towards compliancy with the NIS2 or DORA framework. Mm-hmm. So I think that government already did some efforts. Maybe the information is not always coming towards the end user or towards the organization that needs to apply. Because I saw, for example, for the Siphon, they added now a 6th flavor on the governance side, which is, I think, a challenge in a lot of organizations. That's what we see with our customers. When they have to implement the technical measures that are a consequence of the regulations, that's the thing that we easily can work together on them with. But when it's around governance, it's often a bigger challenge to start working on the governance. And it's good that it's been added in the revised Siphon framework that was published recently, if I'm not mistaken. That is really a separate chapter or focus point on the governance side.
Mm-hmm. So how is it impacting your day-to-day work, for example, these regulations?
For us, we did a big effort in order to be compliant ourselves, because we want to, like Lieven said, you want to have it as a competitive advantage and be able to communicate to your customers about the fact that you're compliant. And what we do with the customers, I see it is challenging because in reality, definitely on the SME market, it's often asked at the IT team of the customer to handle compliance with these kind of regulations, where I am convinced it should be on the management level, it should be a board topic, and from there it should be spread out through the organization. And I don't know if you see the same thing, Lieven, but
Indeed.
That's what I note or see in the field when we interact with the customers.
Indeed, that's true. So it has to be taken onto board level. And also very important to note that in view of NIS2 regulation, that board members are in person accountable for the NIS2 actions that needs to be taken. If the actions are not taken, so they are accountable.
Yeah.
So and that's a major change. So board members have to follow education. So and from there, it's already starting to appear at board level, and because and I agree fully with you, it's not an IT stuff. It's not an IT thing. It needs to boil down to IT, but it needs to be managed at board level. Indeed.
Yeah. At Lebon, Lowie, you are advising public institutions, for example, the local police here in Belgium. So how are they approaching these new regulations?
Well, it's a special context in the sense that for local police, as a matter of fact, the NIS2 regulation is not applicable to them. But I see it as a guideline. It's something that can inspire them. Besides the other laws and regulations they have to follow, but it can help them, guide them in how to build out a cyber resilient infrastructure for themselves, because it's a pretty challenging market. It's very diffuse, and we have a lot of police zones. They all have their own infrastructure, so they all have to build out their own framework, and they have to be able to govern it, guard it, make sure that they do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. So what we see happening is that the European Union is imposing new regulations. On the other hand, we have the US Cloud Act, which extends extraterritorial control, intensifying the debate over who truly governs the data. And there is, of course, friction between both of them. Lowie, according to you, there is, the general assumption that when you store your data on European soil, your data is safe. But that's not really the case, is it?
Well, I think it's a tricky or a complex question which has a lot of angles. You can take a look at it. I'm convinced that the hyperscalers like Amazon, Azure, Google, that they will do everything they can to build out a resilient infrastructure. However, it's like you said, there is the Cloud Act, which permits the US government to take control over the data, which is managed by a company which is headquartered in the US. So this is kind of even when this data is stored in European data centers, I'm sorry, I should have said that right away. But that's some kind of a sort of Damocles that might hang over the heads of those companies, and by consequence also for the companies that store confidential data or very secure data or personal data on these clouds.
Yeah, neat. So can I? So the misconception about the Cloud Act. So everybody should think that's about my cloud. It's about, but Cloud Act from the United States is an abbreviation. So it's it's a 5-letter word saying clarifying lawful overseas use of your data. So they have an amendment, and based on that amendment, then they will now explain in that Cloud Act what it really means for the people overseas, so Europe and so on, what the American government can do with your data. So don't be put on the wrong feet that the Cloud Act is nothing to do with cloud. It's an abbreviation and well found, by the way.
But I'd like to refer to what happened in June this year, 2025, yes, with Microsoft in France. They publicly admitted it cannot legally refuse if US authorities are demanding access to data stored here in Europe. So that was a confession that changed the mindset with a lot, yes, of business leaders. So it is a huge sovereignty risk, especially when very sensible data is being stored.
Indeed.
So do you see that change?
Indeed. So the what happened in France was an eye opener. The risk that they might investigate your data becomes real, so they can really do that. So most companies, how they deal with it today, they have to make a risk evaluation, so make sure that they can that they know what the risk implies and make choices. So for instance, for the risk of the US that might look into your data, and that can also be personal data, you have to execute in technical terms what we call the data processing impact assessment. So you must investigate what are the risks. You must balance those risks against other risks, that's every company that's storing data, and it's managed by one of those hyperscalers, and then you have to take into account what is my risk.
But do you see that business leaders or CIOs are taking action and they're changing their mind regarding the dependence on American hyperscalers? Are they taking action? Are they thinking about moving away their data from those hyperscalers to a European?
Well, in any case, what's quite important, they have to put it on the table. So, and they have to know so do I accept the risk or not? And if I don't accept the risk, then what are my alternatives? So will I put something up in a private cloud or on-prem even? So but it's not an easy case, so it has to be decided case by case and see what can we transfer to, or have a good combination between the two. So this is a very important exercise.
I think if I can add on top of that, if you look at the Cloud Act and what you tell Lieven, it's a lot about am I sure that the confidentiality of the data is guaranteed?
Indeed.
Because we don't want anybody else or another state to take a look at the data which belongs to us. Besides that, I think next to the Cloud Act, there is also the geopolitical context, which might people start to think about the availability of the platform. One could imagine there is a big dispute between the US and Europe and the access to certain data which is stored over there. Although the confidentiality is still guaranteed, the availability or the way I can have access to my data, I can't control. So I think Cloud Act is one thing. The other thing is how sure can I be that my data will be available and that there is no state or any other person, entity that can decide to cut off the access to my data, or because of a trade embargo might play with the prices and make it unaffordable to still continue using it over there. So I think Cloud Act is really a thing people think about, but I can imagine that for a lot of CIOs and I think confidentiality might be very important for government and certain companies, but for a lot of companies also being sure that their data will be available, that they can access it anytime, and that they can count on the availability of the platform. Although that the provider will have taken all technological measures, or as much as possible, taking into account what recently happened. But besides that, there might also be an external factor that could impact the availability of those platforms.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, of course, companies want to have access to their data all the time. And that reminds us of what happened with the major outage with Amazon Web Services. It disrupted the services globally. Incidents like these should, of course, be avoided. But how can it impact the strategy of companies here? What conclusions can they take, knowing what happened, for example, with a huge hyperscaler like Amazon Web Services?
Indeed. So what happened lately with Amazon and the was really a technical issue, and to put it maybe a bit into context, what happened there is a DNS problem, a domain name server. That's technical stuff, but in any case, what it boils down to is when you want to address your service, when you want to use it, you must know where to find it, and if the way to find it isn't clear, then you can't. So suppose that somebody invites you to a restaurant. It gives you only the name of the restaurant, and half an hour before you have to move to the restaurant, you look up that name, and you don't know the address. So where can I eat? You don't know. And what's even worse, that it gives you the wrong address, and that can also happen. So the what happened there is very at Amazon, and a couple of weeks ago also at Microsoft. They had a similar, but it was not that big. But in any case, there was a similar problem, and what you can't really do lots for avoiding those things. So it's you solely depending on those hyperscalers. So and that's my opinion. It's their package, and if you take it as a whole, and when it fails, well, you have a problem.
It made me think what happened at Amazon. We were impacted ourselves at our company. We tried to make choices on data sovereignty, having our data stored in Europe. We have a platform that we use to create tickets, or that the customer used to create tickets, and the platform stores its data in Europe. But even though it was not available due to the outage of Amazon in the US. So it made me think about what is sovereignty. We started by discussing data sovereignty, but it's way more than that. It's not only about the data. It's about knowing how every process, how the technology behind every component should be fitting in our global sovereignty strategy. Because my data was sovereign, because it was stored in Europe, and then you could discuss on the Cloud Act, and let's leave that out of the question here. But to access the data, one component in the SaaS platform was hosted on Amazon. So we were still impacted by the downtime of something which was in the US. So we really have to rethink the technology we use and understand where all components are hosted to truly assess the impact of these kind of situations.
Yes, indeed. And something what's currently lacking is the transparency. So I believe those hyperscalers, they should be more transparent on what kind of components they use, what's behind it, and be able to pinpoint from, if you're using this service, be aware that these and these things can happen, and that's important for knowing what the risks are for using your ticket application, for instance.
Well, it's clear that we have become very dependent on non-European cloud providers, and it is a huge risk. So, do we have the capacity within Europe to be more independent? And if not, what is needed to be more independent in the future?
I'll let Lieven answer that one.
Well, you have to do it. Being your independency, have to start from the drawing board. So, if you build up an architecture, you must make sure that your architecture takes care of certain components might fail. So you must make sure that you can migrate to something else. That can reduce your dependency, that's for sure, but doesn't take it away. So you must know what you will do with the private, with the public cloud, what you will do in your private cloud, and from there on decide how you can migrate from one environment to another.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that's very important. I think it's also a fact that we might see some scattered initiatives today around Europe. I noticed these last weeks on my LinkedIn, probably because I was preparing for this call. There is a lot of posts, sponsored posts on sovereign clouds, definitely from the Netherlands. I see a lot of info passing by on my LinkedIn. Question is whether how big is the gap? What advantage did these hyperscalers take? We also see that the hyperscalers like Azure, they try to build out sovereign clouds here in Europe. That's an in between. They put their technology available for European companies, so that also the operation of the cloud is entirely in European hands. So that's something in between the hyperscaler, which is truly American, and a fully private cloud. We have these hyperscalers building out their own sovereign clouds within Europe. Another challenge, I think, in Europe is the fact that we could start building out our own platforms, but probably we will still depend on a lot of technology which is not European. So it's about the entire stack. It's about the data. It's about the process. It's about the technology, and being able to have all of that at your own fingertips, knowing who is controlling the code that's being used to build out that own cloud platform, and that's probably a massive job. to close the gap
indeed.
if it's even possible.
Well, I have a very interesting figure here. So according to the European Centre for International Political Economy, the European tech and cloud companies are 1.3 trillion, which is $1,300 billion behind the US counterparts in terms of investments. So it is a huge gap between the investment that have been done in the US and here. It will take years before we can make that gap a bit more narrow.
Yes, of course. Will we ever close the gap? No. No, we will never be able to close that gap. But in any case, it starts at every individual person and company to make himself more independent of those cloud platforms. For instance, you were talking about building applications. Now, all those cloud platforms, they have easy ways of building quickly an application, building quick reports and so on. So, and you can design it in the cloud platform of that from that hyperscaler, and they all have their tools, and it's quite handy. It's quite cheap, but it gives you a huge dependency. You can't move away that application to your local on-prem or to your local cloud. You can't do that anymore. So when you think about building an application, well, think twice and say, what do I really need to build that application using all the tools from that hyperscaler or not? And there are lots of other tools in the open source communities, like you mentioned, Louis, and that can do similar things, maybe not as good, maybe not as secure, but in any case, it's a valid alternative. And so it all boils down to make each CIO should ask himself, is it really necessary that we put so much dependency on those hyperscalers?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to move to the business level of becoming more independent towards the US hyperscalers. How can this be a strategic advantage for a company? Because it takes quite some investments to do so, and a bold decision to do so. So can it be a strategic advantage?
Of course. It's all has to do with the availability. So if it happened now a few times, but and if you have no plan B, then you have a problem. So it can seriously be a competitive advantage to say, okay, we have our plan is made up, and we can make sure that when something goes really wrong, this is the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like you say, Lieven, it's not, maybe we take a look at it today as it's or a hyperscaler or something else. And I think the answer there, it might be and both.
Indeed.
It's by building out.
And what exactly do you mean? Like, depending on what kind of information is really crucial?
Yes, what kind of information, what kind of workloads, what kind of context you're in. You might imagine that you invest in a lot of local data centers. There is a natural disaster. And then the public cloud might be your backup plan. If I'm not mistaken, that's what Ukraine had to do after Russia invaded them. They had to evacuate certain workloads back to the public cloud.
Indeed.
I read they had to change the law because there was a lot of personal information which is now at a hyperscaler, but at least they can still offer their services to their citizens. So there they have to make choices, and that's what Lieven said. I think at the beginning it's about managing your risk. It's about making the right choice within the right context. I was reading in preparation of today, I was still doing some research. I was reading on the Belgian defense. I saw that Theo Franken announced that they will invest a lot in data centers to build a sovereign cloud for the Belgian army. I scrolled back a little bit in history of the search results, and I saw in April he said, now the Belgian army has to move to the cloud. So for certain workloads, I'm convinced they will also choose to host them in the cloud, or it might be their business continuity plan in case there should be a big attack or a cyber attack or anything else. They might need to decide to spin up certain workloads in the public cloud. So I really think it's about being aware, thinking ahead, and make the right choices. And when you build out your architecture as a CIO, you have to do it with how do they call it? It's with portability in mind. You should be able to shift your workloads between those different platforms, and with business contingency planning ahead, so that when it fails, either it's your own data center, either something in the public cloud, that you have a plan. Might not be the optimal plan, but at least you can continue your business.
Indeed.
Well, thank you for doing so much research, Lowie, for this podcast. We've almost come to the end of this podcast, but to round up, I have the same question to all our guests, and that's the following: Is there one belief about data centers that you think we should question more often?
I prepared this one also because I was so grateful I could be here today. I thought how could I paraphrase this with something people can take away and will remember, and I think it's a quite obvious one. It's do not put all your eggs in the same basket, and secondly, know where your eggs are.
Indeed, that's something that we can picture. Thank you.
Yes.
That's very concrete. Lieven?
I'm on the data center side. I also saw that question came by, and my reflection is it's not so on the sovereignty part, but it's what is now happening with artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence are putting a lot of pressure on data centers. So data centers they are extremely hungry to power. So they need a lot of processing power. But data centers generate also quite some heat. And for the moment, the data centers are positioned often where there is the most power. In future, I would like to maybe we will have a trend on data center will be put where we can use the heat. So this is because the heat is far more difficult to transfer than the power.
Mm. That's absolutely a topic that is widely discussed, the sustainability of data centers. Well, thank you very much, Lieven and Lowie, for this very interesting discussion on data sovereignty.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening or watching this podcast. If this conversation inspired you, I invite you to subscribe and explore more episodes at datacenteruniversity.be, where we empower shared knowledge and spark new ideas for the digital leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, for more insights that drive digital leadership.